Questa è l'Etna, veduta da Passopisciaro.
On Friday, September 19th, 1986, during a trip to Sicily, I took a bus from Palermo to Lercara Friddi and spent the day there. As the bus service for this 1 hour, 4-minute ride is infrequent, I took the 6:45 a.m. bus and arrived at 8:30 a.m., armed with a photocopy of my father's baptismal certificate. My father was born in New York, but Grandma and Grandpa moved back to Lercara Friddi when he was an infant and returned again to New York about a year later. So this is how my father came to be baptized in Santa Maria ad Nives Church in Lercara Friddi. I ordered a coffee at the cafe next to the bus stop and asked the proprietor if he could tell me the way to the church. I explained that my father was baptized there and I wanted to see it. He said make a right and then a left after a few streets and asked my name. All the Virzis, he said, were dead. The guy next to me at the counter concurred. I soon found the church at the Piazza Duomo, but it was closed. So was everything else so early in the morning. Street vendors were just setting up their stalls. So I walked up and down the streets of this hill town. The narrow cobblestone streets were so old they were worn smooth to the point of being slippery. The farther up the hill I walked, the more I felt myself walking back in time. Peasants led mules laden with sacks of grain down the streets, and several houses had stables built into them and wall rings to hitch up their mules. People were sitting on chairs in front of their doors, like they didn't have a thing to do or a thought in their head. From the top of the hill, where there was a convent, I could see the main street and almost the whole town. On the fringes of the town, there was some new housing, and beyond, the fields. But for the most part, the town looked like it hadn't changed much over the past several hundred years. At 9:30, I got tired of walking, and as the church was still closed, I went to the police station and explained to the captain who I was, and could he please telephone to the church so that the priest could open the church for me. I showed him the baptismal certificate and explained that I hoped to find in the church's records the address of my grandfather's house. This became the major topic of conversation for 20 minutes, as everyone who happened to be hanging around the police station at that moment joined in to put in their 2 cents about whether there were any Virzis left in town. At 10 of 10, the captain told his sidekick to accompany me to the church, which was open at 10, and to explain to the priest for me why I was there. As we walked together, the policeman told me that Lercara Friddi was 1985 or 1986 years old. I imagine this means that there has been some settlement of one form or another there for that long. He also told me that Lercara was the name of the founder of the town, and that the whole region, or paese, was called Friddi, and that Friddi is not a distortion for Freda in Sicilian. When we arrived at the Piazza Duomo, the church was open, and the young priest was standing in front of the open door. But rather than go to the church, the policeman decided he had a better idea than his captain, and took me to the town hall in the Piazza Abate, right next door to the church. This was okay with me, as I was in no hurry, and I was delighted when we walked up the stairs to the office, where the town's records are kept. The policeman pointed out to me the prison as we made our way up, and I couldn't help but wondering if the jail housed any mafiosi, since this was the town where Lucky Luciano and Carmine Gambino were raised. This was the heart of mafia country. The functionary at the records office was very obliging, and after inspecting the baptismal certificate containing both Grandpa's and Grandma's names, he produced in what seemed less than a minute the marriage document of one Antonino Virzi, born November 20th, 1873, to one Carmela Giordano, dated July 31st, 1910. Their address was given there, as well as the name of Antonino's father, Rosario, and Rosario's mother, one Raffaella Iovino. Eureka! Jackpot! I couldn't believe I had found it all so easily, as I eagerly copied all this information down. The policeman then took me to the address indicated in the document, Piazza Abate Romano, number 31, just a few houses away from the town hall. Standing on the balcony of the top floor was an old, ancient woman who we called out to, but she didn't hear or notice us. So we rang the doorbell, but a young woman answered. Just at this instant, the tower bell of another church across the street began to ring so loudly that we could not hear each other speak, and so couldn't start the introduction. I thought the bell was ringing out the hour, 10 o'clock, but instead it was ringing for the feast, and continued to do so for about 2 minutes straight. Finally, the policeman, introduced me as a cousin from America, and we were invited inside where we met Francesca, the old woman who lived on the 3rd floor. She was quite senile and could hardly understand what we were saying, but I learned that she had married a Rosario Virzi, who had died, and Carmelina, the young 25-year-old woman who invited us in, was her adopted daughter. Zoriana, as everyone called Carmelina, lived on the 2nd floor with her husband Gaetano Tartabellotta and small son Salvatore, or Salvo. They invited me for lunch, and so Gaetano and I went out to buy what was needed for the meal. In doing so, I met a butcher, who said he had seen me earlier that morning walking by his shop, and we made the rounds to homes of Gaetano's friends and relatives, where I met many people and was offered many drinks of liquor and coffee. We also visited what were once the old sulfur mines, just outside of town, where my great-grandfather died one hot summer afternoon many years ago. He was a carpenter who made the wooden elevator shafts for the mines, and on that fateful day, the heat, or perhaps the fumes, consumed him during his descent in the mine. The mines are now closed. One interesting person we met didn't look like she belonged there at all when I first saw her, for she was blonde and fair-skinned and spoke to me in English. Gaetano's brother had worked in Amsterdam some time ago, and there met a Dutch stewardess who he married and brought back to this small town in the middle of nowhere, a perfect place to run away from the world. After dinner, Zoriana broke out a family scrapbook containing photos. When she showed me the photo of Antonino Virzi, I realized that this was not my grandfather's father, and realized that instead, finally understanding fully what she had been trying to explain, that it was her great-grandfather. I hadn't known at the time what my great-grandfather looked like, but this man looked nothing at all like my grandpa, and from this I knew at once. So there were two separate pairs of husband and wife, named Antonino Virzi and Carmela Giordano, married approximately the same time, and all aged more or less the same, at least all within a few years of each other. And if the odds against this are not astronomical enough, and on top of that they all came from the same small town. Granted that Giordano seems to be a popular name in that town, and Christian names get handed down as children are named after their parents or grandparents. But nonetheless, when I saw my grandparents' names in the book of records, I didn't bother to look further. I didn't even think of it. After all, how many Antonino Virzis and Carmela Giordanos could there be that got married? Zoriana and I exchanged addresses. Gaetano showed me the carpenter shop of Zoriana's grandpa, and he showed me back to the bus stop. I insisted on going back to Palermo on the next bus because I had missed the previous one, and I think I came off as a bit unfriendly on account of it. They wanted me to stay the night, go to the festa, and sleep over. But I was disappointed after going down the wrong path in my search, and had had enough of this small, dry town of my ancestors. Although, I suppose that in a way, I could never leave this town, because I am a son of it, and will carry a little bit of it around inside of me as part of its heritage. Lercara Friddi is still a poor town even today, and both the town and countryside were parched and dry. For example, Zoriano and Gaetano received running tap water only 3 days a week. They stored water in buckets for the other days, like everyone else. There is a cemetery just outside town, which I did not visit.